Kenule Beeson Ken Saro-Wiwa was a member of the Ogoni People, an ethnic minority in Nigeria whose homeland, Ogoni, in the Niger Delta, has been targeted for crude oil extraction since the 1950s and which has suffered extreme environmental damage from decades of indiscriminate petroleum waste dumping. Initially as spokesperson and then as president of the Movement for the Survival of the Ogoni People, MOSOP, Saro-Wiwa led a non-violent campaign against environmental degradation of the land and waters of Ogoniland by the operations of the multinational petroleum industry, especially by the Royal Dutch Shell Company. He was also an outspoken critic of the Nigerian government, which he viewed as reluctant to enforce environmental regulations on the foreign petroleum companies operating in the area. However, on November 10, 1995, Saro-Wiwa was killed by hanging by the Nigerian federal military government under the dictatorship of General Sani Abacha. Kenule Saro-Wiwa was the son of Jim Wiwa, a forest ranger, and his third wife, Widu. He changed his name to Saro-Wiwa after the Nigerian Civil War. His father's hometown is the village of Bori, Ogoni, whose residents speak the Kana dialect of the Ogoni language. Saro-Wiwa spent his childhood in an Anglican home and eventually proved himself as an excellent student. He received primary education at a native authority school in Bori and later attended secondary school at the government college in Umuahia, present-day Abia State. A distinguished student, Saro-Wiwa was captain of the table tennis team and amassed school prizes in history and English. At Umuahia, he was the only student from Ogoni, but fellow students were mandated to speak English, which made Saro-Wiwa feel Nigerian. He embraced the language as a useful way to communicate to a larger audience at home and abroad. On completion of his secondary education, he obtained a scholarship to study English at the University of Ibadan. At Ibadan, he plunged into academic and cultural interests, winning departmental prizes in 1963 and 1965 while working for a drama troupe. Ken Saro-Wiwa briefly became a teaching assistant at the University of Lagos and later at the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. He was an African literature lecturer at the university. When the Civil War broke out, Saro-Wiwa supported the federal government and had to leave Nsukka for his hometown of Bori. On his journey to Port Harcourt, he witnessed the multitudes of refugees returning to the east, a scene he described as a sorry sight to see. 3 days after his arrival, nearby Bonny was liberated by federal troops. He and his family then stayed in Bonny, but he later traveled to Lagos and took a position at the University of Lagos. This did not last long as he was called back to Bonny. Ken Saro-Wiwa was called back to become the civilian administrator for the port city of Bonny in the Niger Delta, and during the Nigerian Civil War positioned himself as an Ogoni leader dedicated to the federal cause. He followed his job as an administrator with an appointment as a commissioner in the Old Rivers State. His best-known novel, Soza Boy, a novel in rotten English, tells the story of a naive village boy recruited to the army during the Nigerian Civil War and intimates the political corruption and patronage in the Nigeria's military regime of the time. Saro-Wiwa and his wife Maria had 5 children who grew up with their mother in the United Kingdom while their father remained in Nigeria. They were Ken Wiwa and No Saro-Wiwa, both journalists and writers, and No's twin Zina Saro-Wiwa, a journalist and a filmmaker. In addition, Saro-Wiwa had 2 daughters, Singto and Adele, with another woman. He also had another son, Kwame Saro-Wiwa, who was only 1 year old when his father was executed. In 1990, Saro-Wiwa began devoting most of his time to human rights and environmental causes, particularly in Ogoniland. He was one of the earliest members of MOSOP, which advocated for the rights of the Ogoni people. The Ogoni Bill of Rights, written by MOSOP, sets out the movement's demands, including increased autonomy for the Ogoni people, a fair share of the proceeds of oil extraction, and remediation of environmental damage to Ogoni lands. In particular, MOSOP struggled against the degradation of Ogoniland by Royal Dutch Shell Company. In 1992, Saro-Wiwa was imprisoned for several months without trial by the Nigerian military government. In January 1993, MOSOP organized peaceful marches of around 300,000 Ogoni people, more than half of the Ogoni population, through 4 Ogoni urban centers, drawing international attention to their people's plight. The same year, the Nigerian government occupied the region militarily. On May 21, 1994, 4 Ogoni chiefs were brutally murdered. Saro-Wiwa had been denied entry to Ogoniland on the day of the killings, but he was arrested and charged accordingly. He denied the charges but was imprisoned for over a year before being found guilty and sentenced to death by a specially convened tribunal. The same happened to 8 other MOSOP leaders who, along with Saro-Wiwa, became known as the Ogoni Nine. Some of the defendants' lawyers resigned in protest against the alleged rigging of the trial by the Abacha regime. The resignations left the defendants to their own means against the tribunal, which continued to bring witnesses to testify against Saro-Wiwa and his peers. On November 10, 1995, Saro-Wiwa and the rest of the Ogoni Nine were killed by hanging by Nigerian military personnel. They were buried in the Port Harcourt cemetery. At the time of his death, Saro-Wiwa was 54. It took 5 attempts to hang Ken Saro-Wiwa before he spoke his last words and his body went limp. "Lord, take my soul," but the struggle continues, were his final words before he died blindfolded and dangling from a rope. Kenule Beeson Saro-Wiwa Polytechnic, formerly Rivers State Polytechnic, is named after him. Also, a street in Amsterdam, Netherlands, has been named after Saro-Wiwa, the Ken Saro-Wiwa Strat.
Consequently, a constitutional conference with full constituent powers will be established soon to determine the future constitutional structure of Nigeria. The Constitutional Conference will also recommend the method of forming parties, which will lead to the ultimate recognition of political parties formed by the people. While the conference is on, the reorganization and reform of the following major institutions will be carried out.
We always have more stories to tell, so if you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Would you like to know more about General Sani Abacha? Do check out our next video.